In the centuries after Roman legions withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, the island entered a period that historians have long struggled to understand, a time traditionally called the Dark Ages, not because life stopped, but because written light grew dim. Roman Britain had been deeply connected to the wider Mediterranean world, with towns, roads, law, coinage, and literacy supported by imperial administration. When that system collapsed, it did not fall with a single dramatic event. Instead, authority fragmented quietly. Central government disappeared, armies disbanded, and the flow of Roman goods slowed and then ceased. What followed was not instant chaos, but a long transformation whose details remain elusive, preserved only in scattered archaeology and a handful of texts written decades or even centuries later. One reason Britain's Dark Ages remain so mysterious is the near absence of contemporary written sources. Unlike the Roman era, when officials recorded laws, taxes, and events, early medieval Britain produced very few surviving documents. Most people were illiterate, and monasteries, which would later become centers of record-keeping, were only just beginning to develop. What little was written often survived only in copies made much later, altered by time, memory, and political purpose. This means that much of what we know comes not from direct testimony, but from fragments, clues, and educated interpretation. The most important early written voice is that of Gildas, a British monk writing in the 6th century. His work was not intended as a history, but as a moral sermon condemning the sins of contemporary rulers. He described Britain's suffering after Rome's departure, including raids, internal conflict, and appeals for help that went unanswered. Yet Gildas provided few dates, few names, and little detail. His Britain is a moral landscape rather than a chronological one, leaving historians to debate how much reflects reality and how much reflects religious rhetoric. Still, his writing confirms that Roman authority was gone and that Britain was struggling to redefine itself. Archaeology fills some gaps but creates new questions. Excavations show that many Roman towns were abandoned or repurposed, while rural life continued in altered forms. Stone buildings gave way to timber structures, and coin use declined sharply, suggesting a shift from a cash economy to one based on local exchange. Yet this does not necessarily mean decline in living standards across the board. Some regions adapted successfully, developing new power centers and trade networks. The problem is that archaeology reveals what people left behind, not what they believed, named, or recorded, and it cannot easily explain political events or personal identities. Into this uncertain world came new peoples from across the North Sea, traditionally labeled as Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. For centuries, this movement was described as a violent invasion that overwhelmed the native Britons. Modern scholarship presents a more complex picture. Archaeological evidence suggests a mixture of migration, settlement, and cultural exchange rather than a single catastrophic conquest. In some areas, newcomers lived alongside existing populations, gradually reshaping language, customs, and power structures. In others, conflict likely did occur, but its scale and speed remain debated. What is clear is that over time, much of Eastern and Southern Britain adopted Germanic languages that would evolve into Old English. This transformation of language is itself a mystery. Language shift on such a large scale usually implies significant social change, but how it happened in Britain is still unclear. Did incoming elites dominate politically and culturally, causing locals to adopt their speech? Or did demographic change play a larger role? The lack of written records from ordinary people make it difficult to answer. Place names, burial practices, and material culture offer hints, but none provide a complete explanation. Against this backdrop of uncertainty stands the figure of King Arthur, perhaps the most famous and most controversial symbol of Britain's Dark Ages. Arthur does not appear in any contemporary 5th or 6th century record. The earliest references come centuries later in works such as the Historia Britonum and the Annales Cambriae, which describe a warrior leader who fought against the Saxons. By the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth transformed Arthur into a legendary king, ruler of a vast empire, blending folklore, invention, and political propaganda. These later stories cannot be treated as reliable history, yet they may preserve echoes of real conflicts and real leaders whose names and deeds were reshaped by memory. The enduring appeal of Arthur reflects a deeper historical truth. Britain in the post-Roman centuries was a land of competing identities, where Romano-British traditions, incoming Germanic cultures, and surviving Celtic kingdoms all struggled for dominance. In the west and north, regions such as Wales, Cornwall, and parts of Scotland retained British languages and traditions, preserving a sense of continuity with the Roman past. In these areas, oral storytelling flourished, and heroic figures may have been remembered long after written records vanished. Arthur, whether real or not, became a symbol of resistance, unity, and lost order. Religion also played a crucial role in shaping early medieval Britain. Christianity had survived the end of Roman rule, but was unevenly practiced. In the West, British Christianity developed along distinctive lines, while in the East, many of the new settlers initially followed pagan beliefs. The gradual re-Christianization of England began in the late 6th century, notably with the mission of Augustine, sent from Rome. This process generated new written records, and with them, clearer history. From this point onward, figures like Bede provide more reliable accounts, marking the end of Britain's darkest historical shadow. Yet even with improved sources, much of what happened between Rome's withdrawal and the rise of early English kingdoms remains uncertain. Political boundaries shifted constantly, alliances formed and collapsed, and power rested on personal loyalty rather than stable institutions. Kings ruled small territories, and their authority depended on military success and kinship ties. Such systems left little durable trace, making reconstruction difficult. Britain's Dark Ages remain shrouded in mystery, not because nothing happened, but because too little was written, and what was written came later, shaped by memory, belief, and ambition. Archaeology continues to uncover new evidence, challenging old assumptions of collapse and barbarism. Instead, a picture emerges of adaptation, resilience, and cultural transformation. It was in this shadowed world that the foundations of medieval Britain were laid, and from which legends like King Arthur arose, standing at the boundary between history and myth. The enduring mystery endures, not as a failure of knowledge, but as a reminder that the past is often quieter, more complex, and more elusive than the stories later generations wish to tell.